Hello and welcome. So today we're going to be looking at quadratic inequalities. So this is very similar to the quadratic equations that we've been doing in the unit so far. The only real difference here is that instead of having an equal sign, we're going to have a greater than or less than sign, which is going to change how we present the answer at the end. So as usual, before I can solve a quadratic equation, I need to have it in standard form, or another way to think of it is I need to have 0 on one side of my inequality or equation. So the first thing I'm going to want to do here is subtract 7x from both sides. So of course that'll give me my 0 over here. And then again, since the 7x is not alike with either the 2x squared or the negative 4, we'll just copy everything down in order. And so once we have our standard form, our next step is going to be to rewrite it into factored form. So we'll go ahead and set up our box. So we'll get the 2x squared first. We'll drop the minus 4 to the next row. And of course, to split the 7x in the middle, we know we're going to need to multiply the 2 and negative 4 together to get negative 8. So we'll figure out the two things that multiply to negative 8 that will add to negative 7. So of course I can do 1 times 8, and if I make that 8 negative, 1x minus 8x will give me my negative 7x. So let's go ahead and put those guys in the middle. And then of course we'll factor each row and column. So if I go across the top row, I notice there's an x in both terms. I also notice that both 2 and 8 will divide evenly by 2. If I go to the first column, I need an extra x on top to make the 2x squared in the top corner. If I go to the bottom row, I need a plus 1 here, so I can multiply the 1 and x to get the 1x. And then finally, if I do the right column, I need the negative 4 right here, so that I get 1 times negative 4 to match the bottom column. So then we'll group the values on the top of the box to form one factor, group the values on the bottom, or the side of the box, I should say, to get the other factor. And then we bring down the greater than or equal to 0 so that we have our inequality written the way that it's supposed to be. And so from here, we're just going to solve for our values of x like we would if this was just an equation. And so once again, your values of x bring each factor to 0. So if I see x minus 4, I know that my x value I'm looking for is positive 4, because 4 minus 4 gives me 0. For the other factor, if you can't just think of the number in your head, right, don't be afraid to just write it out. So I'm looking for something that brings 2x plus 1 to 0. So I know to get this, I would subtract the 1 from both sides. Then I would divide the 2 from both sides, which tells me that my other x value is the fraction negative 1/2. So far these steps have looked exactly like the equations we did in our previous videos. Here's where the extra step comes in. So because I have an inequality, I can't just say x equals 4 and x equals negative half. I need to present my solution either as an inequality or as a number line. So what I'm going to do is sketch my number line, and I'm going to label the two x values that I just got. And so if I'm putting 4 and negative half on the number line, I know that the positive numbers are always on the right and the negative numbers are always on the left. Then, to figure out kind of how I want this number line to look, I'm going to envision what a parabola would look like in my head. So I know that when I graph these quadratics, we always get a shape that looks something like this when our x squared term has a positive number in front of it. And then from there, I'm going to go to my inequality and figure out which chunk of this graph represents the solution that I want. So this says that I want the part of the graph that is greater than or equal to 0. So because my inequality is underlined, I'm going to put close points on my two x values. Then because it says greater than 0, I'm going to look for the highest points on my parabola, right? So the highest points on my parabola are up here. So that tells me that my number line should have arrows pointing out. So the number line form of my solution looks just like this. If I'm writing it as an inequality, I'm going to think back to how we did this when we did absolute value, because the number lines are going to look pretty similar to that topic. So if I look at the way my number line is filled in, I have two sections. I have x is less than or equal to negative 1/2. And I have x is greater than or equal to 4. And since it's two alternate or opposite facing arrows, I'll just put the word or in the middle to say that both arrows should be included. So for our second example, we'll go ahead and look at one that's already in standard form, and then we'll just work it from there. So we know that when we're in standard form, right, all we have to do is start with the factoring. So once again, we copy down our x squared and our positive 4. If I want something that multiplies to positive 4 that adds to negative 5, I know I can combine negative 1 and negative 4. To get negative 5x. So once again, we copy those into our box and then factor the rows and columns. So across my top row, I have an x in both terms. Across my first column, I have an x in both terms. I know I've got that right because x times x gives me the x squared in the top corner. If I go to the bottom row, I need a negative 4 here. And then I need a negative 1 here. And I double check, negative 4 times negative 1 gives me positive 4. So I've got my factors written correctly. So once again, from the factored form, we find the values of x that make each factor equal to 0. So if I see x minus 4, I know x needs to be equal to positive 4 because 4 minus 4 is 0. I know that if I see x minus 1, x needs to equal positive 1 because 1 minus 1 is 0. So now I'm going to sketch my picture. Remember, I need to label my two x values, and it's very important that I put them in numerical order. right? So if I'm counting, I always need to put the 1 on the left and the 4 on the right. Otherwise, by inequality, the final answer is going to be backwards. So again, we had an x squared parabola. So if we're trying to imagine what this picture looks like, we get our little u. This time, when I go to my inequality, it just says less than, right? It's not underlined. So that means I'm going to use open circles on my 1 and my 4. And since it says find the part that's less than, I'm going to look to where the lowest points of my parabola are. So if the lowest parts of the parabola are in the middle, that means my number line should highlight the part that's between the 1 and the 4, or the part that's in the middle. So my number line should look like this. If I'm writing my answer as an inequality, again, just like before, with our absolute values, if we only have one section of the number line that's highlighted, then we just give our answer as a single compound inequality. So I'm going to say that the solution to this equation is the part of the number line where 1 is less than x is less than 4. That's all I have for this one. I will see you guys next time.